Good morning.
Good morning. Congratulations.
It's good. Thank you. Thank you, Mary. It is good to be back at my home church at UUCA and see all of you incredible folks here to talk a little bit about democracy. And I realize it might seem ironic to talk about democracy in a week where the President of the United States went on television and gave a speech questioning the fundamental truth and legitimacy of our elections in a way that foreshadowed what we know is coming, a bid to take more power away from people like us, regular people, and concentrate it in the hands of the billionaires and the bishops and the bigots that cluster so tightly around the cult that runs our country. It's why now more than ever we need to understand as a collective what democracy means, and we need to cultivate in ourselves a commitment to it and a willingness to do what it takes to defend it. So my name is Fish Stark. I am proud to be the executive director of the American Humanist Association. We represent the community of tens of millions of Americans who believe that science tells us what's real and compassion tells us what's right. And our hundreds of chapters around the country, our nearly 24 staff, we fight to bring this community together and to defend the things that humanists have been defending since the founding: the freedom of conscience, the separation of religion and government, the inherent worth and dignity of every human being, or as this administration calls it, terrorism. This is my dream job. I was a very argumentative kid, and so I hoped I would one day grow up to lead the American Association of People Who Agree with Me. That's a joke on a couple levels. For those of you who are humanists, can you imagine us agreeing on anything? You know, it's there's that old joke, some of you have heard it, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. As humanists, we have 2 humanists, 4.5 opinions, and a board subcommittee on whether you can have half an opinion. So as Mary was acknowledging, I got married 3 weeks ago. Thank you. When a Unitarian humanist marries a secular Jew, we call that an interfaithless marriage. We were married at London Town, just over the South River, by a humanist rabbi in a ceremony that opened with a quote from a Unitarian minister and ended with me stepping on a glass and praying my foot sole was strong enough. A Christian couple bought our menorah that we had on the registry, and a Muslim couple bought the bench scraper that my wife Maddie uses to make challah for Shabbat. So if you ever wonder whether religious pluralism is still possible in America, just go watch some millennials get married. There are shared beliefs that are bigger than anything that might divide us, and one of them is that it is good to celebrate young love. And one of those other things that binds all of us in this room together, whether we believe in God or not, whether we came up Christian or humanist or pagan or Muslim or none of the above, is a belief in democracy. The idea that nobody is born better than anybody else, and that the only authority worth obeying is the kind that rises up from the people, rather than a kind that is handed down from on high. So this Good Trouble Lives On weekend, when the country stops to honor the legacy and the work of John Lewis, I want to talk about democracy, why it matters, how we keep it, what humanists of all people have to the conversation. Because humanism, believe it or not, when it was still in the cradle, the brainchild of 2 amazing Unitarian ministers, John Dietrich at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis, and his counterpart, the Reverend John Reese or Curtis Reese at the First Unitarian Society of Des Moines. They called it the religion of democracy. They called humanism at the time the religion of democracy. And I want to explore what it means to hold a belief in democracy that is as deep and as fervent and as fiery and as passionate and real and alive and inextinguishable as any faith held by any fundamentalist. Earlier this year, I was in Minneapolis speaking at the first Unitarian Society, the church John Dietrich, who founded the AHA, once led, about the murder of Renee Nicole Good. And while I was there this January in Minneapolis, I saw a miracle. Not a miracle of the supernatural kind, where a bush lights itself on fire or a sea parts to reveal a path. We still don't believe in those. But the miracle of everyday people taking on great risk to themselves to form a human chain around people they did not know who were being targeted by violence. Of hockey moms and seniors and high school students patrolling their neighborhoods and wearing whistles around their necks and organizing massive demonstrations to stand up for people they had nothing in common with, except for the transcendent fact of our common humanity. The theologian Jonathan Z. Smith called religious ritual, quote, a means of performing the way things ought to be in conscious tension to the way things are. Performing the way things ought to be in conscious tension to the way things are. Wrapping our arms around our neighbors to shield them from harm, putting ourselves in the path of danger to protect the dignity of someone we do not know but hold in our heart because we're both members of the human community, choosing to place the flourishing of our neighbors over fealty to any authority. In conscious tension to the forces trying to teach us that our empathy and care and concern for others is a weakness. In conscious tension to the voices that tell us humanity can be parceled out into hierarchies of those who belong and those who don't, saved and damned, holy and sinner, Americans and aliens. In conscious tension to the choice by the powerful to use cruelty as a political weapon in the hopes we will be terrified enough to turn away from each other. And listen to what they called it. When the Atlantic Monthly profiled the faces of the resistance in Minneapolis, they spoke to a couple in their 70s named Dan and Jane. Dan and Jane were not the people who had been protesting all their lives, but they joined the protests. They braved the bitter cold and the threat of brutality late in their lives because they knew this went too far. And they contended that for them, this commitment to freedom and dignity went beyond politics. When the reporter from The Atlantic asked if this was a political commitment to them, Jane said, no, this isn't political. This is humanist. When I say we have it in our power to begin the world over again, the words that Thomas Paine shared with a frightened young nation 250 years ago, I mean that in a time when the authoritarian right is desperately trying to convince us that we can't win and shouldn't try, is trying to numb and scare us into staying home because they're terrified of our solidarity, it is the time for us to proclaim louder than ever what humanism has always believed about human potential. That as small as they may make us try to feel, within each of us is a deep reservoir of human potential, of capacity for wisdom and goodness and courage, and through the amazing power of collective action, we can cast down kings. We can cast down kings and breathe humanity into a world that needs it. That as the Reverend John Dietrich said, our faith is not in the power and willingness of God, but in the intelligent thinking and cooperative effort among ourselves. That ordinary people working together, trusting each other, believing in everyone's dignity, can take on power and triumph. That we are the makers of miracles in a democracy. Democracy is a kind of faith. It requires us to have faith in other people, to believe that there is more wisdom and goodness, more wisdom and goodness than wrongness or foolishness in our neighbors, so that we can open ourselves up to their voices and harmonize them with our own. And it requires us to have faith in ourselves, to believe that we have ideas sharing and rights worth defending, to believe in the validity and power of our own voice. Now, you may be wondering why a humanist is up here talking about faith. But this faith that allows us to sustain democracy is grounded in evidence. It's a reasoned faith. It doesn't ask us to believe in miracles that have never been replicated. It asks us to believe that miracles like the one I witnessed, that we all witnessed from our TV screens in Minneapolis this year, that those kinds of miracles are repeatable over and over again. Because our faith in other people gets tested. It gets tested all the time. People let us down. We show up to the meeting and half the committee didn't read the email. And the other half won't stop talking. And 2 hours later, nothing's been decided, and you drive home wondering why you even bothered. We put our trust in a leader, and they disappoint us. We put our trust in a movement, and it breaks our heart. None of that means that democracy is broken. It means that democracy is hard. And the way anything worth doing alongside other flawed human beings is hard. There is a kind of man, it's always a man, who builds his whole career on feeding off of that disappointment that comes when people let us down. The autocrat watches us fail each other, as we do, and sees his opening. He points at the mess and he says, look how they let you down. Look how nothing works. Look how alone you are. You cannot do this on your own. And once he's got you scared, once he's got you convinced you're alone, the rest of the pitch is you need me. You need someone stronger than you. Give me your voice and I'll use it better than you ever could. And the humanist looks at that and answers back, you're right. We can't do it alone. Because we have to do it together. Not because people are perfect, goodness knows we're not, but because there is more wisdom and decency in a room full of ordinary people than there has ever been in any one strong man who ever lived. And because we've seen throughout American history, throughout world history, that when we are able to come together and make sacrifices and use our wisdom, whether it's been for women's rights or civil rights or expanding the franchise or putting a man on the moon or developing the best public school system in world history, when we are able to do things together and put our faith in each other to achieve an outcome that works for all of us, tremendous things are possible. And so here's what my humanism has led me to believe. The instinct to reach for something bigger than ourselves is not a problem. That instinct is right. There is something way bigger than any one of us, and reaching for it is one of the most human things we do. We just keep looking in the wrong direction. We look up. We look out. We look off toward the mountaintop when the thing that we're reaching for is sitting right here in the seats next to us. Sagan said that the cosmos is within us, and therefore so are all of its truths. A little piece of them inside every person. None of us got the whole thing, which means that the only place we're ever going to find it, truth, meaning our path through the wilderness, is in each other. Belief systems are about more than who made the world and what happens after we die. Belief systems are about more than who made the world and what happens after we die. They are theories about where morality lives, where power belongs, and where truth resides. We have a cynic in the White House right now who uses the language of God because he reveres not Jesus but power. And the language of God has been used again and again to tell people when they ask about truth and morality and power that those things belong not to us but somewhere else. And when you ask humanists where morality lives, where power belongs, where truth resides, the answer is always in all of us. I have people ask me if humanists reject the concept of a supreme being, and I say, oh, it's worse than that. We don't just reject the existence of a supreme being. We reject the concept of a supreme being. We reject any theory of power, of dignity, of righteousness that denies that it is the equal inheritance of every one of our neighbors. The autocrats keep winning because in challenging times we seek simple answers, and it is easier to be told than to decide. It is easier to hand your conscience to a book or a bishop or a billionaire and let somebody else carry for you. Looking outside yourselves for the answer asks nothing of you except that you kneel. Building the answer yourself with your neighbors, most of whom you disagree with about something, is the hardest work that there is, and that's why it is hard to come to this conclusion. But what humanists have always understood, and what we've always made real, is that that work of democracy is what helps bring us into a new level of awareness and bring our world into a new level of achievement. That's why you can find humanists at the front of every fight to make this country more democratic. Whether it was Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson, a UU humanist, by the way, at the founding, writing the freedom of conscience into being, whether it was Frederick Douglass, a humanist and a Marylander, who demanded that America live up to those immortal words the founders wrote and could not live up to themselves, or Elizabeth Cady Stanton and the suffragettes, or A. Philip Randolph, who was the chairman, a humanist and the chairman of the March on Washington. Over and over, humanists have helped bet everything on the radical idea that ordinary people can govern themselves better than other people. Humanism and democracy at their root are the same faith. But I have to be honest with you and with all of us, because it is way too easy to tell a story that says, we in this room are all the good guys, and we've known the right answer for centuries, and if we could just get everyone else on the same page, those nasty people out there would see the light and all of our problems would be solved. The autocrat is not only out there, the autocrat is also in here. In me, in you, there is a little tyrant, a petty tyrant living inside every single one of us. And he's loudest on the days we're most certain that we're right. He's the part of me and the part of you that doesn't want to hear the other side, that wants to win the argument rather than understand it, that looks at somebody who is wrong and wishes just for a second that you had the power to make him be quiet. You've got him. Everybody's got him. The hunger to rule other people is not only something that lives in dictators. It lives in the human heart. And democracy is the daily discipline of looking that hunger in the eye and telling it no. Remembering actively and practicing the fact that there is wisdom out there outside of us. And the autocrat is also the part of ourselves that tells us no. That tells us to be afraid of rocking the boat, that shames us into silence, that tells us the lie that our ideas are not worth sharing. The autocrats work so hard to teach us shame because they thrive on our silence. And Douglass, the man who taught himself to read and then they made it a crime because they realized how much damage that could do, Douglass said that our speech, our voice, is the dread of tyrants. It is the dread of tyrants. Thrones will tremble everywhere, he said, if people are allowed to freely reason. That hymn that Lewis and the Marchers were singing as they came over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, lift every voice and sing. It only works because every voice is singing. We have to tackle the autocrat within ourselves that says we don't have something to add. They are counting on that silence. What Frederick Douglass, what John Lewis, what a whole mess of interfaith troublemakers has told us is that it is possible for us to defend democracy, to sustain democracy, to push it forward. But it also requires tremendous risk. We, as Unitarians, talk about the fire of commitment. We are a people known for our commitment. This is the year that we have to find our fire. And we can find it not just by looking within our own tradition, but by looking outside of it, right? John Lewis was born on a cotton farm outside Troy, Alabama. He was the son of sharecroppers, and he didn't dream of being a congressman and a civil rights leader. When he was a boy, he wanted so badly to be a preacher that he preached sermons to his chickens. And then he realized he would have to do his preaching with his body. He was 25 years old when he walked up to the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma on the 7th of March, 1965, and he was wearing a trench coat, and he was wearing a backpack with an apple, a toothbrush, and a couple of books because he expected to go to jail. And by that time, he had been to jail so many times, he figured he ought to pack a bag. On the far side of that bridge, there was a wall of state troopers, and John Lewis knew what they were going to do to him. He walked toward them anyway. When they fractured his skull, he got up and kept going. Why would a person walk straight at men that he knew were about to hurt him? Why would he keep going with a cracked head? He walked because he had figured out that nobody was coming to save him. There was no cavalry coming over the hill, no hand reaching down out of the sky. If black folks in Alabama were ever going to be free, they were going to have to free themselves together by walking across that bridge again and again until the whole country was ashamed enough to change. He wasn't waiting to be rescued. He was doing the rescuing. And so are we every time we choose to stand up in defense of democracy. Lewis's name for that choice was Good Trouble. Now, I want to be careful about those words because I've seen them on too many t-shirts and too many bumper stickers. And I think one of the things we need to remember is that good trouble means taking risks, making sacrifices, acting alone, and trusting others to follow. It has to mean more than standing up for democracy in the simple and quiet ways. It means putting some of ourselves on the line. It means giving when it is uncomfortable. It means speaking out when you know you are going to be opposed. It means challenging people who it is uncomfortable to challenge. It means working a little harder, showing up to the action when you'd rather not, choosing to believe that your voice and your presence makes a difference, and choosing to sustain it even in the face of threat. And I don't want people to think that winning fights for democracy is just a thing that happened in the 60s or in the suffragette movement. I want to be very clear as someone who leads a national civil rights organization that is fighting for constitutional principles, we are winning these fights right now. Even under the shadow of authoritarianism, at the AHA, we are striking down bills even in states like Kansas and Nebraska that want to take our public tax dollars and send them to private religious schools that discriminate against children. We are winning. Thank you. Yes. We are winning cases in federal court that want to misuse our tax dollars to promote the narrow-minded, extreme Christian evangelical religion of Pete Hegseth and J.D. Vance. We are winning those cases. Bush-appointed federal judges are giving us favorable verdicts because the Constitution still exists until we give up on protecting our rights under it. It is not possible to defend democracy easily. But as my humanism teaches me, we don't need permission or intervention from an outside source to make miracles happen. We have what we need within us as long as we are not alone. When I was in Minneapolis, what struck me were the whistles. They hung around necks. They were stuffed in pocketbooks. You had UUs carrying them to the service. They had the whistles, to blow when they saw ICE agents, so that people in the community understood that people who were there to respond and form human chains knew where the ICE agents were located. For people who needed to get out of the way and get somewhere, they could understand very quickly, I need to get inside. A small act of civil disobedience, a small act of solidarity. Anyone can blow a whistle, young or old, abled or disabled, man or woman or anything in between, rich or poor, anyone can blow a whistle. And in Minneapolis, people only felt safe to go out when they knew there would be enough people, even people they didn't know, blowing a whistle on every corner if harm was going to come to them. I want you to think not about the past, not about the far future, but the next 3.5 months. If the people of Minneapolis were able to carry whistles and set up the potlucks and form the human chains and set up the hot chocolate stands for protesters who were protesting outside the ICE facility in -30-degree wind chill, We thought it got cold here with the 2 feet of snow last year. Negative 30-degree wind chill. What is it that we are prepared to do in the next 3.5 months? The autocrat within yourself, shut him up for a little while. The one that says, I don't really have anything to contribute. Or the one that says, even if I contribute something, I can't make a difference because, we've been let down too many times in the past few years by our neighbors. Remember the lesson of Minneapolis. Miracles are possible. Remember the lesson of Frederick Douglass. They are only possible if we trust ourselves. Remember the lesson of John Lewis. They are only possible if we're willing to tolerate risk and invite sacrifice. Remember the lesson of lift every voice and sing. The chorus does not work if all of our voices are not present. And remember the lessons of humanists throughout history. No one is coming to save us, but that also means no one ever has, which means everything that we have done here. We evolved from fish and built civilizations. We created the idea of constitutional religious freedom when we cast out the king on an empire on which they said the sun would never set. And then we updated our country and we made that promise real as we expanded the franchise to every single person, as we fought against Jim Crow, as we fought for the Voting Rights Act, that piece of law that John Lewis got his skull cracked open over, which they're now trying to repeal. We have given ourselves all of the evidence we need for that faith in each other and that faith in ourselves to sustain democracy. So let's all go make good trouble. Thank you very much.